Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. Please visit our website, cscatlanta.org, for a complete list of live and recorded events. We invite you to sign up for our newsletter to stay connected to all future programs.
For our breast patients, because you are usually the ones who are most active and advocate for your care and most interested in our nutrition talk. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here. This will be more of a general presentation on breast cancer and nutrition. If you need super specific information or you have very specific questions about your own personal journey, we do have dietitians throughout the entire Cancer Institute that are most likely assigned to your medical oncologist or your radiation clinics, and then even some of the surgery clinics as well. We can help service those where we have access to your medical records and we can give you more personalized care. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I just might have a little bit of limitations, or you might be like, Kristin, I can't do that. I'm in active treatment, and that's okay too, because a lot of this is for more after your treatment. But if you're able to do some of this stuff during treatment, that's perfectly fine as well. So we will jump right in. We have what the American Institute for Cancer Research, their top 10 recommendations for reducing cancer risk. So both for cancer prevention and reducing your risk for a recurrence or developing other cancers down the line. So we'll go through a lot of these today. So I won't, jump too far in, but being a healthy weight next to not smoking and also wearing your sunscreen is one of the most important preventative factors that we can focus on. And we'll talk a little bit more about it here in a little bit, but also being physically active for those who can be physically active, having a diet that's rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes. A lot of times people hear plant-based diet, and wonder what that means, but it's really a focus on getting these fruits and vegetables and whole grains in. Limiting the consumption of fast foods or other foods that are high in fat, starches, and sugars. Limiting the consumption of our red or processed meats. Limiting consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Limiting or avoiding alcohol. Not using supplements for cancer prevention. We'll dive into that a bit more towards the end. And then for mothers, if you're able to breastfeed your baby, please do. If you have people in your life that are around that age, encourage them to do so. And if you can't, that's fine too. There are some evidence that shows that can reduce risk as well. And then after you've been diagnosed with cancer, trying to follow as many of these recommendations as you can will be helpful. So we will dive in a little bit more, but maintaining a healthy weight. And I get asked a lot, like, what does that mean? What is a healthy weight? We want like a specific number, but it's not always going to be a specific number for every person. And there's a lot of more research that's coming out and more of a controversial topic, but I don't want to not touch on it. But we look at your body composition. So what are you made of versus what your weight is on the scale. So we want you to have good muscle mass. We want you to be lean and strong. And as we age, we tend to lose muscle mass just naturally through the aging process. So we want to make sure through our exercise that we are including exercises that are going to build up our lean body mass and help to reduce fat mass. So it's not always just the number on the scale or the weight, but thinking about the fluffiness or the fat that we contain or have, especially in our abdominal area, can be a sign of leading to other chronic diseases and increasing our risk for cancer. So by helping to reduce fat mass and increase our muscle mass, it helps to reduce our risk for chronic diseases. So you don't want to get through all of your cancer treatments just to develop other chronic illnesses down the road, like diabetes, heart disease. And we want to prevent any complications if you do already have some of those chronic diseases. So learning to manage that through diet and exercise the best that we can, or at the very least, helping our medications to work very effectively. And then it used to be thought that body fat just kind of lived on us and it didn't really do a whole lot, but we actually know it's an active tissue and it can act as a hormone pump, and it can affect things like our insulin levels, estrogen, testosterone, and other hormones that can actually spur cancer growth to happen. So that's why we focus more on that fat mass and reducing it and increasing our muscle mass. And when you increase your muscle mass, you actually increase your metabolism, which helps keep you burning calories at a higher level. So you don't have to be so restrictive, and we're not always dieting for our whole lives, because that's not fun whatsoever. We want to have good relationships with food and with our bodies. And this is a different way of thinking about it than what's previously been talked about, and even what I was taught in school. So physical activity, this is important to help keep our good endorphins going, but the recommendation right now is 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. So that breaks down to about 30 minutes, 5 days a week, which when you break it down that way, it's pretty doable, right? So this could be anything from walking, jogging, biking, playing tennis, anything that brings you joy and it's movement and some physical activity is what we want you to be doing. So if you hate running, then don't run. If you love running, run if you're able. So you want to focus on things that you like to do that aren't going to be like, oh, I have to go work out, or I have to get my physical activity in and I don't want to. We want you doing things that help keep you active and, again, bring you some excitement to your life and that you look forward to doing. And sometimes that's finding a buddy to go walking with. Like, maybe you don't like walking by yourself, but you like walking with a neighbor and catching up on things. And we've all been very isolated for the last 2 years. So it is difficult to get back out there and start building those relationships again, but it will help our overall health as well. And you might be one of those people that just likes, that's your time to unplug from everybody else and it's your me time. Also perfectly fine. You have to figure out where you are and how you function and what motivates you, and we'll take it from there. So starting small, it all counts. If you're like, Kristin, I've sat on the couch for the last 2 years. I've been going through treatment. I'm tired. I'm fatigued. That's perfectly fine. You start where you're at. You should not be running a marathon tomorrow if you've never run a day in your life. We start small and we build it up over time. It's all going to count. Any kind of physical activity is going to lead to health benefits overall. You can add walking or standing breaks to limit the time that you're sitting throughout the day. This is a big one, especially if you work desk jobs or you just have like a faster paced environment that you're working in and you forget to get up and go to the bathroom, or forget to walk down the hallway to stretch your legs a little bit. Or, I too can watch TV for hours at a time without getting up. So my watch has to remind me every hour to take a walk and get like 250 steps in, or, whatever you set your stuff up to. So there are times in my office that my light goes out because I haven't even moved enough. And so that's usually a sign that we need to get up. So just being mindful of that too. They keep saying sitting is the new smoking. I don't know how true that is going to be in the long run, but we have to be up and moving and letting our blood flow throughout our limbs and not always sitting and hunched over where our lungs can't breathe. So getting out and about and just stretching those legs is great. Limiting screen time to 2 hours or less. This can be very hard, especially if you're working or you're stuck in treatment for 4 hours, 6 hours at a time. So this is more like when you're at home, trying to stay off your phone, trying to limit the time you're watching TV. And a lot of this has to do with making sure you have the ability to get out and do some of this physical activity. Because if you're watching 3-hour shows and you've only got like 5 hours after work or at home in the evenings, you might not have a lot of time to get out and do the physical activity. So this helps to cut down and give you that time back to do those physical activities. Are we okay? Okay. And then spacing it throughout the day. So if you are super busy, or again, you have treatments and you're like, oh, well, I only have 15 minutes. You can spend 10 of those minutes out walking, doing some exercises at home. A lot of people get resistance bands so they can just do maybe during commercial breaks. But not everything has to be done in 30 minutes all at one time. So you can do 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and it's going to add up over the course of the day, which helps with breaking up your sitting and your standing. And then some people are super busy again, and they want to get it all done in the morning first thing. That's also perfectly fine. So again, you just have to figure out where you're at as a person and what you want to do and what makes sense for your life. So plant-based diets, again, we heard that term earlier. This does not mean that you're going to be vegan or vegetarian, although if you are, that's perfectly fine as well. But a lot of people are not vegetarian or vegan. And so where do we get started with these plant-based diets? What that means is that most of the food that's on your plate or that you're consuming throughout the day comes from plants. So if you think about like the salad that we have here today, different vegetables, having your snacks as maybe fruit and nuts, and trying to limit the animal proteins when you can. But animal proteins can still be very helpful. They're helpful in building some of that muscle mass, but there's plant-based proteins. So you don't have to completely cut out animal proteins if it's something that you like to eat or if it's important to you. That's going to be perfectly fine as well. But when we focus heavily on these fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, you get a lot more dietary fiber, which is very helpful for our GI tract. It helps with our bowel movements. It helps to keep our gut microbiome. That's going to be another term that becomes popular. It's already popular, but it's going to be more and more popular. But those are the good bacteria and viruses and stuff that live in our bodies that help keep our immune system strong. But they love to eat fiber. So that's kind of their food, and that helps to strengthen those and create a nice environment inside of our bodies. A lot of our vitamins and minerals also come from these foods. So a lot of people are always asking about supplements and what they need to have. But we have to focus on getting these plant foods in before we really start focusing on supplements and different herbs and that kind of stuff. And then these foods also help to give us what they call phytochemicals or phytonutrients. So these are different compounds that are found within these fruits and vegetables and whole grains that help protect us against cancer. So there are thousands of them out there. They're not even all identified yet, but we know that they have a very protective effect of our cells. They help to get rid of damaged cells that could turn into cancer. But they're things like isoflavonoids. We're going to talk about carotenoids later on in the presentation and how those relate to breast cancer. But these are the great sources of those foods. And this is what gives different fruits and vegetables their color, their smell, their taste. And so if you think about a tomato, I like to use as an example, a summer tomato, how red it is and luscious and juicy. Those have a lot of phytochemicals going on in there. They've got a lot of vitamins, a lot of minerals. They're at the peak of their season. They look great compared to maybe some of the winter tomatoes that we find that are more pale and pink and white on the inside. They're still good for you. They just might not be packing all those phytochemicals because they're not really in season here during that time of the year. So that's a good visual to think about those phytochemicals and how to incorporate those. And there's not one that's better than the other. Sometimes I get asked that as well. Like if I only had one vegetable to choose from, which would it be? And you have to eat the rainbow. You have to eat all the different colors to get all the benefits. So there's not like just one superior food out there. And then all of these, the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals have been linked to health benefits to also help with lowering your risk of heart disease, lowering your risk for type 2 diabetes, and also lowering your risk for cancer. And then people who follow vegetarian and vegan diets tend to weigh less than non-vegetarian. And so if okay.
Someone was asking, what was that gut micro word again that you
the
said?
microbiome. It's microbiome. I could do talks for days on the microbiome, but there's still a lot to be learned. So we haven't tackled that yet as a topic here. All right, so getting started on your plant-based journey is to really put plant foods first. So I learned or was reminded recently that only 1 in 10 Americans get the recommended fruit and vegetable serving per day from the USDA, which is generally 5 to 7 servings. So if you're one of those 1 in 10 or 10% of the community that is already reaching that, give yourself a pat on the back. If you're like, well, some days I get that, Kristin, but other days I can go a whole day without having a fruit or a vegetable. That's where we need to start, is on those days and how we can look at those meals and those snacks and add in some plant foods and try to get that consistency going. So it's really about focusing on, okay, I've got some Brussels sprouts in the fridge, so I'm going to have those tonight. what pairs well with that. Where when I was growing up, and I'm sure many of you, it was more like, oh, I've got chicken, what can I pair with it? So it's really about highlighting and putting those plant-based foods as the star, and then having your animal proteins as a supporting role. Does that make sense? But focusing on a balanced plate with mostly the whole foods, and it's okay to use the fresh fruits and vegetables or frozen and even canned stuff. So if you're doing canned like beans or green beans, things you can rinse off, you can always rinse those to get the excess sodium. That's usually the concern there. Sometimes people will read, well, they have less nutrition in them than the fresh version. And that could be true, especially if you're having to cook them, but you're not losing all of the nutrients. You're probably losing a very small amount. And if you're eating these foods regularly, your body's going to take what it needs and use what it needs and get what it needs throughout the whole week. So it's not like a one day and done. Like you can't just eat well for one day and be like, all right, I'm healthy. It's an ongoing situation that we have going on here. Okay, so we talked a little about the carotenoids being one of the phytochemicals, and this is a phytochemical that has a lot of antioxidant properties. So that's another big buzzword. And so those are compounds or cells or molecules that help to protect our body against things that want to damage it. So they call that oxidation or free radicals. So it helps to capture those things and neutralize them and get them out of our body. But the carotenoids show potential to alter cell signaling, the way they talk to each other, and inhibit cancer cell growth and promote the cell to die, which is what we want it to do if it's a cancer cell, right? So there was a study done called the WELL study, and it looked at women with early stage breast cancer and high levels of plasma carotenoids. And they saw a 43% reduction in new breast cancer events compared to women that had lower plasma levels. So they determined from that study that long-term exposure to a diet high in fruit and vegetables may be more responsible for that positive outcome, that 43% reduction, than a short-term intervention where you're only focusing on just getting a bunch of carotenoids in at the same time. So it's more about incorporating these foods into your diet over the long term than just doing like a 1 week thing or trying to take a supplement that's got a lot of carotenoids in it. So you might be asking, well, Kristin, what foods have carotenoids? And there's a lot of them. So your alpha and beta carotene are an excellent source of carotenoids, and that would be in your like orange and reddish family. So your carrots, mangoes, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, red bell peppers are all great sources. And a lot of these are coming in season now. And you can think about like different carrot soups and having your sweet potato. And of course, it's October, so there are pumpkins everywhere. So figuring out how to incorporate some of these foods into your diet will help to give you a good level of carotenoids. And then we also have lycopene is going to fall under that same umbrella. And so that would be anything with tomatoes. So your tomato paste, tomato soup, vegetable juice, tomato juice, watermelons, tomatoes, ketchup, pink grapefruit, and baked beans are all excellent sources of lycopene. And then lutein, and I am not good at pronouncing words anyways, but the one on the bottom left corner here are a lot of your green things. So your spinach, your kale, your turnip greens, collards, summer squash, peas, again, pumpkins, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, avocado, egg yolk are all going to be great sources. So you have a lot of things to choose from. And this is only like 3 out of our 4 sections so far. And then our last section, again, more pumpkin, more papayas, red peppers, orange juice, tangerines, carrots, yellow corn, watermelon, paprika, oranges, nectarines. So hopefully of all of those lists, there's a handful of them that you like to have and that you can start thinking about some recipes where you can include some of these foods. So I love sweet potatoes in the fall and the winter. They're an excellent, colorful way to add things to your plate, but it can be something super simple like a piece of chicken, half a sweet potato, and a bunch of Brussels sprouts or some broccoli on the side. And you've actually got 2 out of the 3 foods you might be eating are going to have these carotenoids in them. So it doesn't have to be anything super fancy. I always tell the story about I used to try to make all these like gourmet meals off of Pinterest, and I would spend hours slaving away in the kitchen, and it was fine and good sometimes, but not always. And then my mother-in-law came to visit, and she just like whipped up a pork chop and a sweet potato and was like, oh my gosh, it's so good. And I'm like, is this all I have to do? And so you can keep things very simple. It's just adding these in throughout the day and throughout the week. We'll get those in for you. Lignans is another hot topic that I hear a lot with our breast cancer patients. And so again, a lot of more research needs to be done on a lot of this stuff, but they believe that it can reduce tumor growth. And lignans are found in whole grains, seeds, nuts, legumes, fruits, vegetables, and flax seeds are a very rich source. So we get asked a lot about flax seeds. And if you like flaxseed, or you want to experiment and see if you like flaxseed, then by all means, carry on with that. If you're like, I do not like flaxseed, you do not have to eat flax seeds. That's okay. But studies have shown a decreased risk for breast cancer with flaxseed consumption. And it's as little as half a teaspoon of flaxseed per day. And our bodies absorb ground flaxseed better. And I don't think that like flaxseed oil has lignans in it. It's more of like the powdery part of the flaxseed than just the oil, because the oil is just pressed out of the seed. But you can add this to cereals, to muffins, yogurt, salad. Some people just put it in a smoothie. There was a study that was done with like a 25-gram flaxseed muffin that people consumed every day. So again, if you like some of those things and want to experiment, it's very easy to incorporate it into items that you're already doing. And then we also get questions about tamoxifen and if there would be interactions. And so far, there have not been any interactions that have been found. So these foods would be good to include if you like them. And this is a good stopping point to talk about. A lot of people want to know about the ketogenic diet, and I'm sure we have an entire talk about that in another recorded session that we have. But if you see all the foods that we're promoting here as being cancer protective, they're all carbohydrate foods. And so being on a keto diet or a low carb diet eliminates these foods out of your diet, and you're taking away those things that are going to be protective of you. It's more focusing on these foods and watching portion sizes that help with the weight loss and stabilizing blood sugars and help to keep you in control. So I just wanted to give a little plug there for that. I'm sure that will spur some questions. Soy and breast cancer is a very common question, and there is a common consensus from health experts now that soy foods are in fact safe for breast cancer survivors. Back in the 80s, I think there was some controversial theories that went around, and there was research that was kind of done, or maybe it just wasn't done very well. But we've had a lot more research done since then, and it's suggesting that soy foods may even decrease the likelihood of breast cancer recurrence. That's not strong enough for me to tell every breast cancer patient, you need to add soy into your diet. But if you already eat soy or you like soy foods, then you do not have to avoid them. And then again, if you want to experiment and add some of these foods in, then that's going to be fine as well. And then most health experts agree that the evidence is not strong enough, that's what I just said, to recommend that all women with a history of breast cancer eat more soy. But there have been several large, thousands of women, human studies that have shown, compared with women who do not eat soy, that women who do eat soy regularly have lower breast cancer risk. So we know that it's not harmful. So they still need to take the time to research and show how it benefits and that kind of stuff for some follow-up. And then some studies also suggest that breast cancer survivors who consume soy foods have a lower risk of recurrence compared to those who are avoiding soy. So just something to keep in mind. And we have studies both from Asia and the US populations. And this is really important because in Asian cuisine, soy has been a part of their traditions for a long time. But in the US, it's relatively new. But we know that different cultures and different ethnicities have different genetic makeup. So you want from both sides to see what's happening. And The studies are observational, so they're looking at what's happening. They're not necessarily doing an intervention. So it's always possible that the true connection with the better breast health isn't necessarily the soy, but maybe something that is related to people who eat soy. So a good example of that is maybe that women who eat soy foods also eat less fried foods and they eat more vegetables. So maybe it's the more vegetables and the less fried food, and it's not necessarily the soy that's helping to give them better outcomes. So they're not 100% sure on that. But the overall message is that soy hasn't shown that they're to be harmful. So again, if you like soy, want to eat soy, soy is going to be okay. And then soy foods diet and tamoxifen. So postmenopausal tamoxifen users with an increased intakes of soy had significantly decreased risk for breast cancer recurrence in a study. And then increased intake of isoflavonones, which is the category that soy falls under, were associated with decreased risk of recurrence for ER and PR positive breast cancers. So sometimes people ask specifically about their hormone status and how that might change if they can have soy, but it's shown kind of across the board, definitely that it's not harmful and that it could potentially have benefits down the road once we're able to prove why that is. And then in a meta-analysis, women that were taking tamoxifen who had higher intakes of soy isoflavones had a 37% decreased risk for breast cancer recurrence. So soy got a bad rap early on because it has phytoestrogens. The chemical makeup of soy looks a lot like human estrogen, but it's not the same, and it doesn't influence our bodies like a human estrogen would. So that's where that confusion came in years ago. So you might be asking yourself, how much soy do I need, Kristin? Excellent question. So moderate consumption is 1 to 2 standard servings daily of whole soy foods. So that could be something like tofu, soy milk, edamame is a soybean, and soy nuts. So 1 serving averages about 7 grams of protein. So it's a good protein source for you. And then it's got about 25 milligrams of the phytochemical isoflavonones. So examples could be 1/3 of a cup of tofu, which is about 3 ounces, which is about what we would want for a piece of chicken or a piece of pork or fish, is standard 3 to 4 ounce serving. Or a cup of soy milk is 8 ounces. I always like to give a disclaimer to check the size of your cups at home because most cups are not 8 ounces anymore. So you've obviously have a measuring cup that's got 8 fluid ounces in it. But even like our bottled water, like this is 16.9 ounces. So that's actually 2 cups. So if you drank something this size, I know even my small cups are more than 8 ounces. I think they're 10 or 12 ounces. So just being mindful of that when it comes to portion size. A 1/2 cup of edamame. So I like to just buy the frozen edamame and I throw it in salads or in stir fry just to help add that in without having to like shell it myself. But if you like shelling soybeans, that's okay. And then about 1/4 of a cup of soy nuts. So that's the standard, like a cashew or an almond would also be about a 1 ounce or 1/4 of a cup portion size. And then the studies have demonstrated that up to 3 servings per day is consumed in Asian populations long-term, has not had any link to increased breast cancer risk. So right now, the recommendation again is more of the 1 to 2 standard servings, but anywhere up to 3 is most likely going to be safe as well. So dairy, always a hot topic these days as well. Okay.
One question, there's a lot of different types of soy. I was instructed to stay away from soy concentrate and soy isolate. It's more of a comment.
Yeah, so the more processed forms of soy, which you're talking about, are things that you would probably want to limit or to stay away from. And that's the same with any processed foods. The more processed something is, the less healthy it normally tends to be. Excellent point.
And then there was just another comment that they were given a handout by their oncologist when they were diagnosed that said no to soy. So
Okay. You can let me know who that oncologist is, and we can do some re-education in a very nice way. But it's true. I mean, we hear it literally every day within our own institution. Yeah. Yes. It is very popular for people to tell you that soy is a no-no. Not anymore.
Reason to set up an individual appointment with
Yep.
an oncology dietitian.
Yeah. Yeah, and soy is one of those foods too that there's just a lot of controversy around too in the way that it's grown, and it is infused in a lot of our shelf stable foods. And some of that research might come out later that maybe that kind of soy, the way that it was processed and produced, doesn't have the same benefits as if you had some tofu or if you were eating the edamame. So if you're having to choose between foods that are really higher processed, like I see it a lot in different protein powder, or not protein powders, protein bars, for example. You don't grow a protein bar on a plant. So that's going to be more processed than maybe a protein bar that's got some nuts that are stuck together with other ingredients. So you can typically tell something that's more processed versus something that's more in its natural form, but lightly processed. And a lot of soy can be hidden in things. So yeah, you can use caution. And then people have environmental concerns and sustainability, and maybe you don't like the farming practices of certain companies out there. So you do have to do a little bit of research if those areas of concern are bothering you, which is perfectly fine. There's all kinds of soy that you can pick from that comes from other companies. Any other questions, Emily?
There was another one about flaxseed, which I think we talked about earlier, is that they saw a warning on the flaxseed that they had purchased, ground flaxseed, citing some California proposition. Any input of that with the connection to cancer?
Yep. So the California Prop 65 is always an interesting law to navigate. So if you're not familiar with it, and I can't speak like super intelligently to the whole law by any means, but they identify certain things that might be a carcinogen or could cause cancer. So you'll see these warnings out in California from anywhere from Starbucks to Disneyland. And everything in between. So if there's any kind of compound in anything that they've identified to be a carcinogen, then they have to put a warning label on it. So a very interesting one is coffee, that they put it on there, and there is a carcinogen that's found within a coffee bean. But when you look at coffee as a whole, we've had tons of studies that show that coffee actually helps to reduce cancer risk. So you have to look at things from a larger picture. We would literally, I don't even know that we could breathe or eat or drink water. Like we probably couldn't do anything if we're always looking at like each and every molecule, but you have to look at the synergistic effect of the whole picture. So the coffee bean is really the best example that I have, because we did get asked that question and we had to write an article about it when that Proposition 65 warning came out on coffee, which is why you see it at Starbucks out in California, the warning that it could cause cancer. But again, if you looked at the bigger picture, that coffee is actually reducing cancer risk. So the same thing might be true with the flaxseed or the lignans, that there might be some little tiny component that happens to be within that product or within the flaxseed itself that they've identified of being at risk of causing cancer. But we have studies that show when you consume these foods, it actually reduces your cancer risk. So it can be very confusing and a little bit misleading. Good question. All right, so dairy, again, popular, controversial topic, packed full this presentation with those. So there was a big meta-analysis done that looked at 11 different studies that were with premenopausal women, had an 8% decrease in breast cancer risk with each 300 milligrams per day of dairy calcium that they consumed. So there was another meta-analysis of 18 prospective studies that found that total dairy intake may be associated with a decrease in breast cancer risk. And the association was strongest for postmenopausal women that were consuming a low-fat dairy product. And then in the life after cancer epidemiology cohort, there were also those with early stage breast cancer who ate more than one serving of high fat dairy per day had an increased risk of breast cancer death or mortality. But this was not seen in those who were consuming a low fat dairy product. So for breast cancer patients who enjoy consuming dairy, choosing a lower fat dairy until more research is available is the current recommendation. So sometimes people completely eliminate dairy and they loved dairy and they want it back. So this should bring some comfort to those who are in that boat. But we have a lot of people who like a lot of high fat cheeses. So you do have to use caution because the higher fat dairy intake has been linked to some increased risk for breast cancer. So if you like drinking milk, yogurts, trying to choose a skim or a 1% is going to be the lower fat options for those foods versus your 2% or your whole milk. And sometimes during treatment, if somebody's trying to get more calories in to maintain their weight, you might have switched over to those. And we want to make sure that in your survivorship stage that you're switching back to the lower fat options. And the fat that's found in dairy is saturated fat. So we know that that causes inflammation. Most people know if they have a dairy allergy early on in life because we most grew up on drinking a lot of milk and having dairy in our lives. So people often ask about the inflammation piece and it's linked to cancer, and it's usually coming out of that saturated fat, which is why we recommend the lower fat options to reduce that saturated fat that we know can cause inflammation. And then, of course, some people have allergies, or they might have an allergy to the protein that's in there, or they might have lactose intolerance. So obviously, if you don't tolerate dairy, you don't have to have it either. Okay.
Just the question if this positive association with dairy and decreased risk of cancer is possibly due to the strengthening of your bones that could prevent bone mets and then dairy itself.
That was a question or a comment?
That's a question.
I don't know if the reasoning is because of the strengthening of the bones. I do not know that. And I don't know that they really know that either. Yes, ma'am.
Like ice cream.
Yeah. So the question was, if you like ice cream, what would be the best choice? So it would need to be a low fat option. So a lot of the ice creams are very creamy. They have a lot of a higher fat content because that's what you're looking for in an ice cream. But usually like a low fat yogurt type ice cream is going to be a better bet if you're looking at just the fat content. And you just have to shop around. I mean, there's so many brands out there now. Every time I go to the store, I'm like, what is this new label? So finding something that you like and enjoy. Okay. All right. So red meat is kind of in the same boat as what we talked about with the higher fat dairy. So red meat can increase cancer risk. And these are the reasons behind why they think that might be. But increasing bioavailability of iron content. So it's not to say that the iron causes the cancer. It just might be creating an environment where there's a lot more iron than our body necessarily needs. There are presence of carcinogens produced during the cooking process. So I don't know that we ever recorded our grilling presentation or not. It might be on the CSC website. But when you cook meats at very high temperatures like grilling, it can actually change the chemical structure of the meat, which can lead to some carcinogens. And then also the smoke that ends up settling on those foods from the fat dripping can also be a carcinogen. Red meats also tend to have a higher fat content. So if you think about all the marbling that you might see throughout the white parts of the steaks and the ground chuck and that kind of thing, those are saturated fats again. So that can cause inflammation, which can create an environment that cancer enjoys. And then it also has increased cholesterol in these foods. And so there was a association that was shown of 370 milligrams per day has been associated with increased risk for breast cancer as well. And then there was a great study done that's called the Nurses Health Study 2 that found that consuming more than 3 servings of red meat per week was associated with an increased risk for ER and PR positive breast cancers. And these results were also consistent with a study that was done over in the UK for postmenopausal breast cancer patients. So a lot of people already have eliminated red meats throughout their diet, but just to recap, that's any beef, lamb, pork. Sometimes like our marketing team was like, can you take pork off the list? It's not red. And I'm like, it's technically a red meat, even though it looks a little white when you cook it. But any of those livestock items, even stuff like venison, deer meat, elk, anything along those lines is going to be a red meat. And if you do choose those foods, try to get leaner cuts of the meat. So stuff with less fat on it. Fasting is always a popular question as well. So nighttime fasting may help to promote a decreased blood glucose level. So it allows your body the time to use all of the energy and the sugars that we ate throughout the day. And I don't mean like, sucking down a milkshake sugars, but a lot of foods get broken down into sugar so our body can utilize them. But instead of storing them, fasting over nighttime will help our body to use them without having to store it. So that's what it means by decreasing the blood glucose levels. And then diabetes has been associated with an increased risk for breast cancer diagnosis, and the nighttime fasting may help to lower breast cancer risk for those patients as well. And then as part of the WELL study that we've already talked about, they saw that patients who are fasting more than 13 hours or at 13 hours overnight had decreased rates of breast cancer recurrence compared to those who fasted for less than 13 hours per night. So the current recommendation is to aim for about 13 hours of fasting each night. So if you're like, you like to eat breakfast at 7 in the morning, then you want to have your last meal no later than 6. That would give you 13 hours. Does that make sense? Okay. Also, going on a walk after your dinner, like maybe you went out with your girlfriends or your husband for a dinner and it was a little bit later than you're used to, even doing some kind of walking or a little physical activity after a later meal can help your body burn up some of this blood sugar as well. So it's not going to be stored. We get asked a lot, does sugar feed cancer? And that's usually an oversimplification of what's actually happening in our bodies. But it is important that we are limiting our sugar sweetened beverages because they're just a very fast sugar. It gives us way too much of what we need or what we're going to use unless you're like running a marathon and you need to have some carbohydrate loading ahead of time to give your body the energy to get through it. But most people on a daily basis are not out there burning all those calories. So we want to try to choose mostly water or unsweetened beverages. Sugar sweetened beverages provide energy. So they provide that gas for the car, that sugar that our cells need to run. But they don't really influence our appetites in a good way as a food would. So you might drink this in your full, very short amount of time, but then you're hungry within the hour and you feel like you need to have more food, but you ate a lot of calories just by drinking some of these sugar sweetened beverages, but now you're still hungry because you didn't really give yourself any nourishment, which leads to overeating. And then there is strong evidence that consuming sugar sweetened beverages leads to weight gain, overweight, and then obesity if the trend continues onward. So I like to stop here too and just talk about added sugars for a bit. That's what we're really focusing on, is the added sugars that are in food. So for women, it's about 25 to 30 grams of added sugar per day or less, really like 25 or less. And then for men, it's around 36 to 38 grams of added sugar. And now on the food labels, companies actually have to break that down. So that's anything that's not naturally occurring in a product. It's something that the manufacturer had to add to the product that's in there. And so if you think about only having 25 grams of added sugar per day, the average American gets about 70 grams of added sugar per day. And they put added sugar in a lot of things. So even pretzels, sometimes I'll see, you think they're salty, but they're actually got some sugar in there to help make them shelf stable or whatever the reasoning is behind it. So you really have to check those food labels for that. And I like to use yogurt as an example. So if you get different flavored yogurts, you'll see a total sugar line might be 18 grams of sugar, but added sugars is 12. So you've got, these are made up numbers, so don't quote me on this. You've got 12 grams of added sugar, but you have 6 grams of extra sugar that's naturally occurring. So those 12 is what's going to count towards your 25 grams for the day. So if you knock it out in that one product, you don't have a whole lot of wiggle room for the rest of your day. So that's where looking at labels and checking to see what you're getting is going to help you make better, more informed decisions. Another one would be like flavored milk. So if you get plain cow's milk, that's going to have naturally occurring lactose in it. So there'll be a total sugar is this. And then in regular cow's milk, there shouldn't be any added sugar. But if you bought chocolate milk, maybe the grandkids are coming over, you'll see that there's a new added sugar line that comes on that food label and how much is going to be in there. So just something to keep an eye out for. Yep. Uh-huh. So the question is, if you run or you exercise every day, are you using up the sugar? So it just depends on how hard you're working and how much you have stored. But typically, if you're exercising regularly throughout the week and you're balancing yourself and it's not too much, yeah, you're not going to be storing it. A good way to know that is like, are you just maintaining your weight where it's at? Like you're not gaining weight, you're not losing weight. That's telling you you're in a very good balance. But sometimes people will be like, oh, I had birthday cake this weekend, and so I went out for a walk, like an extra walk or something just to help. And that helps your body, yes, to kind of use that up, use it as the energy versus storing it later. Because our body's like, when we eat stuff, it releases insulin, and the insulin helps to store that into our cells. And it either uses it right away because it needs it, or it's like, I don't need this right now, but I'm going to store it for later in case we get hungry. We have another question.
A question in the chat about someone who doesn't like the taste of water. So they've tried putting fruit or lemon in. What are your thoughts about adding Splenda to the water? They can tolerate Splenda.
Yeah, so everybody's different. So if that's what it takes to get your liquids down, then that's going to be fine. Everybody has their own opinion on artificial sweeteners. And right now, the current research doesn't show a link to increased risk of cancer. But science is always evolving, so you might see things down the road, but I'm fine with that if that's what you like to do. All right, so alcohol and breast cancer is always a touchy subject because it makes people sad sometimes. But alcohol is actually linked to increasing the risk of all the cancers that are listed here, but you'll see breast is right there in the middle. So for cancer prevention, it is best not to drink alcohol. That is the recommendation. That does not mean that you have to follow the recommendation, but alcohol in any form is a potent carcinogen. So it doesn't matter if you're just drinking that glass of red wine for your heart health, or if you're having a beer watching the football game. The alcohol, the ethanol that's in both of those products, or even a liquor, is going to be what the carcinogen is that can cause cancer. So it is linked to the 6 different cancers, like I mentioned, that are here. So if you are concerned, then it's best not to drink alcohol. But if you choose to drink alcohol, then you want to make sure, again, that it's more balanced so that you're limiting your consumption to 1 drink for women per day or 2 drinks for men per day. And 1 drink is typically like 4 to 5 ounces of wine, 12 ounces of beer, 1 to 1.5 ounces of liquor would be a drink. Okay. And then supplements are always a super popular topic. And like I said at the beginning, only 1 in 10 Americans are having the recommended fruit and vegetable servings per day. And so really focusing our time, efforts, and money on buying fruits and vegetables and figuring out how to get those in our diet tend to be a much better use of those resources, because most people, it is possible for you to get the adequate nutrition that you need from a healthy diet. So when it comes to cancer prevention or reducing your risk of recurrence, the research showed that supplements do not offer the same health benefits as eating whole foods. And the panel does not discourage the use of multivitamins. So a general multivitamin out there, if you're like, Kristin, I just cannot eat any orange vegetables and I'm afraid I'm not getting this nutrient, then usually a multivitamin can help fill in the gap there. And then specific supplements for populations that benefit from them. So that would be people who are already deficient in something. So vitamin D is a great example, and I think I have a whole slide on this, but a lot of people are deficient in vitamin D, and you should be taking a vitamin D supplement if you're deficient, because there's not a lot of foods out there that are good sources of vitamin D. And sometimes our body just can't get the nutrients out of our foods that we need. So I have an iron deficiency. I was eating all these iron-rich foods for 3 months. I was dedicated to this. Didn't even budge. So I needed to go on an iron supplement at that time, but I'm also following up with my doctor every 3 months to make sure I'm not getting too much, or when I can stop it, that I can stop. Yes, ma'am. Yep. So the question is more about magnesium and how important that is. All of our vitamins and minerals are going to be important. So anytime there's a out of sync or a lack of that in your diet, then you might have to supplement. So a lot of the chemos that you might experience or have to be on actually deplete our bodies of magnesium. And your doctors regularly check that and they're monitoring it. I see it on almost all of patients these days that magnesium levels are being checked, and they'll tell you if you need to be on magnesium. Yeah, I'd have to look up the exact number. Not like a super common one. Another example of like specific supplements that a population could benefit would also be calcium. So if you're getting older, if you have risk for osteoporosis and you want to protect your bone health, then your doctor probably has you on a calcium vitamin D supplement. And a lot of those now also have magnesium built into them. So those would be examples of things that are great to be on and to take. But again, you always want to be monitoring, make sure your doctor or your dietitian knows what you're taking. But I see a lot of like high dose vitamin C, like you're taking 5 to 10,000% of the daily value of vitamin C. And our body can only metabolize so much at one time. And that can actually cause stress on our bodies. Like it has to metabolize it and get it out. So it's not harmless. Like you're just taking it and you're like, oh, it's natural. It's not that it's always causing great harm, but you might be blocking your body's ability to absorb or metabolize other nutrients that it needs. So zinc is a nice example. A lot of people like to take zinc during cold and flu season, and zinc actually competes with absorption of iron and copper. And so if you're overloading your system with a lot of zinc every day, is your body able to absorb the iron and the copper that it needs to help keep you in a good balance? So thinking about stuff like that is important. Yes, ma'am. Yes, so the question is apple cider vinegar. I don't know. There's some research that's out there. More stuff needs to be done. I never tell somebody to take apple cider vinegar. If you come to me and you think that it's helping you or it helped your knee pain go away and that works for you, then I don't know that it's necessarily causing harm. Sometimes I can't speak from like a tooth decay. I mean, it is very acidic and it can burn. So a lot of people mix it in water. It's perfectly fine to add it into different recipes to get those health benefits too. There's a lot of different salad dressings you can make with like apple cider vinegar. I put it in some soup sometimes, but just taking like a straight shot of apple cider vinegar, that's up to you. Nutritional yeast. Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of vegans and vegetarians who might not consume animal products use nutritional yeast as a vitamin B12 alternative. And it kind of, I heard, tastes like cheese. So if you like that cheesiness in recipes, it can be added in. But I wouldn't consider that necessarily to be a supplement if you're like cooking with it or incorporating it into recipes. Yep. So I feel like I had one more example of a good supplement thing. Also, like during treatment, sometimes supplement reactions can mimic chemo reactions. So we had somebody that was taking niacin, I think, for diabetes control, or I'm not sure exactly what they were doing. But one of the side effects from taking niacin can be flushing, where you turn really red and hot. And that's also a common side effect to show that you're having a reaction to a chemo infusion. And so we had a patient that started flushing and they had to stop the chemo, investigate, do all the protocols for desensitizing them to the chemo. And then after looking through the list of things that they were taking at home, the niacin was really the one that was identified to cause that flushing versus the chemo. So they were able to restart the chemo later, but like, you know, that delays treatment. So we just want to try to avoid those the best that we can as well. So again, always best to discuss supplements with your doctors and dietitian, because there is a lot of stuff out there. I was going through my Instagram yesterday and it was like, these are the top 4 oils that you should consume. And they sold, whoever was promoting it, it was like a doctor, and they're like, message me for a discount code for these 2. And I'm like, okay, great. So just to touch on vitamin D a little more, we do have an entire hour-long presentation on vitamin D that's saved on the CSC website. At the recommendation, we always want to get our vitamin D levels drawn and have those checked regularly if you can. But the test that's done is the vitamin D, the 25 OHD test that comes up. And then having a sufficient amount is about 30 would be the number, but most people like to see it 40 or higher. So only you would know what your labs look like at this point. But I had mine done last year. I was at 33 and my doctor was like, I want you to be at 40 or above. So I started on a vitamin D supplement and I got retested a year later and it was 55. So the supplement I'm on is working. I had somebody that used to work for me who had vitamin D deficiency. She got put on like prescription strength dosing of it. It got corrected. She was normal. Then she went on something that was just over the counter and she went back like a year later and it was low again, even though she was taking vitamin D every day. It just wasn't a good form for her body, or it just wasn't working, or the amount wasn't correct. They weren't sure, but they had to adjust it. So that's why we want to monitor our labs to make sure what you are doing is helping and you're not just wasting money. Yes, ma'am.
Get vitamin D from, and get a percentage of that, or does that have anything to do?
Yep. So vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin. So you do get some from that, but with all of the cancer prevention and wearing sunscreen, those benefits go away if you're protecting yourself from sun exposure by wearing sunscreen. So there's that. So you have to outweigh like vitamin D deficiency over potential skin cancer. And then there's not a lot of foods that are vitamin D rich. So some salmon, eggs, the yolk part, but if you're only eating egg whites, then you're probably not getting vitamin D from that. So there's not a whole lot of dietary things. And then I had somebody, which again, I don't know that this is like completely true, so don't quote me, said that you'd have to like lay outside naked for a solid like 10 minutes at the peak of the sun to actually get the amount of vitamin D that you would need. And I don't know of too many people that are laying around naked outside. Not to say it's not done, but yeah, so vitamin D tends to have to be supplemented.
There's the test called, like, you get all these lists from your test, but So is it called OHD?
Yeah, the 25 OHD. And it's usually just listed as like vitamin D, like if you were reading your lab report. But sometimes it'll tell you there's two that they can run, and this one is the better option. So most places run this one. But yeah, if you're insufficient or deficient, you definitely want to talk to the doctor about being supplemented. And you also have to follow up on some of this stuff too. So I am a dietitian, and I did ask for my vitamin D level to be drawn. They weren't going to do it when they ran my labs. And then I started taking the supplement after they told me that I should. And at my follow-up a year later, I had to ask for them to run it again. I'm like, we can't just like blindly be on these supplements. And she's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll add that back. So you do have to advocate for yourself sometimes. Breastfeeding your baby if you can for mothers. So it's good both for the baby and the mother if you're able to breastfeed. So there is strong evidence that breastfeeding helps protect against breast cancer in the mother. It helps to lower the levels of some of the hormones. Oh, sorry, I'm over time. I will wrap up very fast. At the end of breastfeeding, the body gets rid of a lot of the cells that may have DNA damage. And then babies who are breastfed are also less likely to become overweight or obese later in life. And so that can help lower their risk of cancer later. Do I need to buy organic foods? So there have been no studies that have proven that organic foods are any better than conventional foods. The research clearly shows that eating a diet that's got a wide variety of plant foods, whether it is conventionally grown or organically grown, in addition to being physically active and maintaining that healthy weight, is really what matters. If you like to buy organic food, perfectly fine. Nobody's going to stop you. If what's preventing you from eating more fruits and vegetables is that you can't afford or can't find organic foods, then you don't need to worry about that. That's just something that, you know, again, marketing, the news, all the things have hyped up for us. Summary, other questions, I'll be here. I don't want to interrupt the lymphedema workshop.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. We do have another program starting here in the kitchen, our neuropathy program in person. So I am going to go ahead and wrap. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions. I did want to mention that we do have a cooking demo coming up next Friday, the 28th at noon. And we will have a new chef, Chef Mike. Will be coming in and cooking some delicious fall recipes and have samples available to anybody in person. So we welcome you guys to that, and you can register on our website, cscatlanta.org. And again, thank you for being here, and we will see you all next month for our next nutrition seminar.
Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If you're interested in other live or recorded programs, please visit the online program tab of our website, cscatlanta.org, or follow us on Facebook. We'll be sharing additional information on upcoming programs.